Have you ever wondered if the stories we tell ourselves become the very fabric of our lives? Meet Marjorie, a woman who at 87 had begun to consider her life a tapestry nearing completion. Her hands gnarled with age, but still possessing a surprising strength, often lay clasped in her lap, fingers tracing imaginary patterns as she gazed out the window of her small seaside cottage. The salt-laced air, the cries of gulls, and the rhythmic crash of waves, these were the constants of her existence now. Unlike other seaside cottages, there wasn't a collection of shells or driftwood art placed neatly on shelves. Instead, her home contained thousands of books. The spines acted as souvenirs, highlighting the travels and memories she acquired over the years. Marjorie hadn't always lived by the sea. For decades, she'd navigated the bustling streets of London, a renowned architect celebrated for her bold, innovative designs. Her buildings stood as testaments to her vision, steel and glass dreams reaching for the sky. But the city, once a source of inspiration, had begun to feel like a cage. The relentless pace, the constant clamor, the sheer weight of ambition, it had all become too much. So, she traded the city for the quiet solitude of the coast, seeking refuge in the simplicity of a life lived at a slower pace. She'd envisioned days filled with leisurely walks on the beach, reading by the fire, and perhaps even taking up painting. But the transition hadn't been as seamless as she'd hoped. The quiet, she discovered, could be deafening, the solitude isolating. Her days began to feel monotonous, each one blurring into the next. She found herself dwelling on the past, replaying old regrets and questioning the choices she'd made. Had she sacrificed too much for her career? Had she neglected personal relationships in her pursuit of professional success? These questions, once buried beneath layers of ambition, now surfaced with relentless force. One blustery afternoon, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within her, Marjorie stumbled upon an old wooden chest tucked away in the attic. It was filled with mementos from her childhood, faded photographs, letters tied with a ribbon, and a collection of seashells she'd gathered during family holidays. As she sifted through these remnants of her past, a particular object caught her eye, a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was a gift from her grandfather, a shipwright who had spent his life crafting boats that sailed the world. He'd given it to her when she was a little girl, telling her that it represented the freedom to follow her dreams, no matter where they might lead. The bird felt smooth beneath her fingertips, a tangible connection to a man she'd loved dearly and who had always believed in her potential. Holding the bird, Marjorie began to weep. Not tears of sadness, but of recognition. She realized that she had, in fact, followed her dreams. She had built a successful career, made a name for herself, and left her mark on the world. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten the simple joy of creation, the pure pleasure of pursuing something for its own sake, not for the accolades or the recognition it might bring. The storm outside began to subside, and a sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. In that moment, Marjorie had an epiphany. She didn't need to be a renowned architect to find meaning in her life. She didn't need to build skyscrapers to feel fulfilled. She could simply create, for the love of creating. The next morning, Marjorie walked into town and bought a set of paints and brushes. She'd never painted before, but she felt a sudden urge to capture the beauty of the sea, the drama of the sky, the subtle nuances of light and shadow that she had only just begun to notice. Her first attempts were clumsy, awkward. The colors didn't quite capture the vibrancy of the real world. The shapes were distorted, the perspective skewed. But she persisted, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Marjorie spent hours each day painting, experimenting with different techniques, and gradually honing her skills. She wasn't trying to create masterpieces. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply trying to express the beauty she saw in the world, to translate her emotions onto the canvas. The cottage became her studio, the walls plastered with paintings of seascapes, sunsets, and portraits of the local fishermen. One day, a young woman named Clara, an art student from a nearby town, wandered into Marjorie's cottage. She was drawn by the colorful canvases displayed in the window, a splash of vibrancy against the muted tones of the coastal landscape. Clara was immediately struck by the raw emotion and the unconventional beauty of Marjorie's paintings. They weren't technically perfect, but they possessed a certain something that resonated deeply within her. Clara introduced herself and asked Marjorie about her work. Marjorie, initially hesitant, found herself opening up to the young woman, sharing her story, her struggles, and her newfound passion for painting. Claire listened intently, her eyes wide with admiration. "Your paintings are incredible," she said. "They're so full of life and energy. You should exhibit them." Marjorie laughed. "Exhibit them? At my age, don't be ridiculous." But Clara was persistent. She convinced Marjorie to enter a local art competition, promising to help her with the application process. To Marjorie's surprise, she was accepted. Her paintings were displayed in a small gallery in town, alongside the work of other local artists. The opening night of the exhibition was a nerve-wracking experience for Marjorie. She felt exposed, vulnerable. What would people think of her work? Would they see the beauty she was trying to capture, or would they simply dismiss her as an old woman dabbling in paint? As people began to arrive, Marjorie stood in the corner, nervously sipping a glass of wine. She watched as people stopped in front of her paintings, their faces reflecting a range of emotions, curiosity, amusement, and, to her surprise, admiration. Some even approached her, asking about her inspiration, her techniques, and her story. One man, an art critic from a national newspaper, spent a long time studying her paintings. He eventually approached Marjorie, extending his hand. "Your work is truly remarkable," he said. "It's raw, honest, and deeply moving. You have a unique perspective, a way of seeing the world that is both refreshing and profound." His words were like a balm to Marjorie's soul. She realized that she had finally found her voice, a way to express herself that transcended words. Her paintings were not just images on a canvas. They were stories, emotions, and memories brought to life with every brushstroke. The exhibition was a success. Marjorie's paintings sold quickly, and she received several commissions. But more importantly, she found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had eluded her for so long. She realized that aging wasn't about slowing down or fading away. It was about embracing new experiences, exploring hidden talent, and finding joy in the simple things. Marjorie continued to paint day after day, year after year. Her style evolved, her skills sharpened, but her passion remained unchanged. She became a local icon, an inspiration to young and old alike. People would come from miles around to visit her cottage, to admire her paintings, and to listen to her stories. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Claire visited Marjorie. They sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the waves crash against the shore. "You know," Clara said, "you've taught me so much about life, about art, about aging gracefully." Marjorie smiled. "I've learned a few things myself," she said. "The most important thing I've learned is that it's never too late to follow your dreams, and that the most beautiful stories are often the ones we tell ourselves." She gazed out at the sea, her eyes sparkling with a newfound sense of peace and contentment. Her life was a tapestry woven with threads of joy, sorrow, love, and loss. But it was a tapestry of her own making, a masterpiece created with courage, passion, and a little bit of paint. And though the final threads were yet to be woven, she knew that the story was far from over. Sometimes the most vibrant chapters of our lives are written when we think the book is nearing its end.